everyone, my name is Nicholas Singh, and welcome back to part 3 of our Vicious Vienna series. I know it's been a while since our last video, but we wanted to make sure we had everything you guys asked for in this video. So today, after e4, e5, knight c3, we're going to be looking at black's different options on move 2. So we're going to be looking at, in particular, knight c6. And here I'm going to teach you two different things. The first one is a more positional bishop to c4, and I'm also going to show you a more aggressive wild gambit, this move f4. So let's get right into it. So the first thing I recommend against the move knight c6 is the move bishop to c4. And here black has two main options really. They can either play the two knights defense with knight f6, or they can play the copycat variation with bishop c5. So let's take a look at knight f6 first. So against knight f6, after we got the bishop out, we want to play the move at d3. And d3 builds a little pawn chain here. And the important thing is that we moved our bishop out before playing d3. So if we didn't do that, if we played d3 here, well, now our bishop's going to be stuck behind our pawns, and we're already a little bit worse. So remember, move the bishop out first, and then play d3. And then after we played the move d3, let's say black plays the move d6. It doesn't really matter what black plays. We want to play the move f4. So we play the move f4 here. And we look at this, and what do we want first of all? So black can either take it or ignore it. So if black takes it, now it was kind of like a Vienna gambit, except now we can just take the pawn back because it's defended. That's the benefit of moving the pawn to d3 before playing f4, is that the bishop can just recapture. And this position is actually really nice for us if they take, because now we've removed black's e5 pawn, which was stopping us from pushing d4. So, but if they don't take, we can play the move. So let's say they just develop naturally with bishop e7. Then we can play the move knight f3. And it's also important to move the f pawn before putting the knight on f3. And then after black castles, we can castle short as well. And then let's say something like a6. Now we have another choice. We can either take to open up the position, and that will activate our rook, which will team up with the bishop and target that pawn. Or we can choose the move f5 and try to go for space. And then we can play moves like h3 and g4 to try to expand on the king side. Now, normally it's bad to push pawns in front of your king, but since the center is so locked, it will be hard for black to start an attack. Alright, so let's go back from the beginning. So remember, we want to play bishop to c4, pawn to d3, and then the move f4. And then knight f3. So the way you can remember is that you want to get that structure, and you want to play d3 to build the pawn chain, right? But before you build the pawn chain, you got to get the bishop outside of the pawn chain. So we play bishop to c4. And then after something like knight f6, then we can move the pawn to d3. And then, like I said, it doesn't really matter what black does. They could play like bishop b4 or something. After bishop b4, remember, once we move this pawn, now this square is defended by the bishop. So then we can play the move f4. And let's say black doesn't take. They just go like d6 or something. Then we can put the knight behind the pawn, because we don't want to put the knight in front of the pawn. So after a move like knight f3, and then remember, if they ever take, we can just take back with the bishop, and we're very happy. So these are the kind of positions you want to get. So castles, and now in these kinds of positions, you'll get this a lot. You could either try to play for the move d4, or another common maneuver is queen e1 to go queen g3 and try to put some pressure on the king with like moves like bishop h6, threatening a checkmate and the rook. And then you can bring your knight into d5, and you basically try to start some attack, because you have right now in this position you have 1, 2, 3, 4, or well, once the queen makes her way over there, 5 and possibly 6 pieces staring at your opponent's king, and your main aim is to try to start some attack. So one final thing you have to be careful is whenever this bishop moves to c5, so they could play it here. I'll show you what to do if they play it on move 3 and you get the copycat. But let's say they just played the two knights, we played d3, and instead of blocking in their bishop, they played bishop to c5. Now, bishop c5 is a very good move against the Vienna because if we typically want to play the move f4, but if we play f4 here, we still can, but you just have to be a little bit careful because the computer says it's a little bit risky because we open up this diagonal. But once you give the computer a bit of time to think, it'll realize it's okay. So just be very careful about playing the move f4. And another way to deal with this is after they play the move d6, which locks in their bishop, we oftentimes, after knight f3, short castles, we can play this move knight a4. So what this move does is that since the bishop can no longer retreat, we're pretty much going to guarantee to capture it with the bishop. If the bishop comes to like here, obviously we'll take it. If it comes to here, you don't want to take it with the knight though. You want to play the move c3. And the move c3 will kick the bishop out, and the bishop will, not there. They'll either have to go back to c5 or b6, and then we can take, and then castles. And we have a similar setup where we keep this tension. We can consider going f5, and again, we try to start some attack onto the black king. Okay, so we're back at the starting position after knight c6, and we play the move bishop c4. So let's look at if they play bishop c5. This is called the symmetrical or copycat variation. Against this, here we actually have a pretty crazy move. Because black moved the bishop so early, without developing the knight, we can immediately punish him, and this is all theory. We play the move queen to g4. So what does queen to g4 do? It threatens the g7 pawn, and almost threatens to trap the rook. So your opponent has to play very precise here, and these games often lead to very wild positions. So black has the choice to make. He either has to defend this pawn or move it. So let's look at the move g6 first. So against g6, this can actually be a little bit dangerous for black because they've weakened the f6 square. So right now, if we just develop normally, we would actually lose, because right now black is a threat. He's threatening the move d5, because the move pawn to d5 would hit our bishop and hit our queen simultaneously, and we can't defend both. So here we have to drop the queen back. I like to drop it to f3, and f3 threatens checkmate in one move. So black has to respond. I've had people blunder knight d4 attacking the queen, and that's just checkmate in one move. So the way black usually defends against it is the move knight f6. Now here, if you remember the next few moves, you will almost always win. First, we have to play the move knight to e2. And what knight e2 does is stops the move knight d4. Because if knight d4 happens, it would hit our queen and the c2 pawn, and it just gets unpleasant. So now if this knight ever comes here, we could just take it with our knight. Let's say black just castles, if black just castles here, then we play the move pawn to d3. And black can lose instantly here if they play the supernatural move pawn to d6, going for the symmetrical variation. And remember that move they made, g6? It weakened the dark squares around the king and the knight. Now we have the amazing move bishop g4. And right now we're threatening to take the knight, and the knight cannot move, because if the knight were to move, we would take the queen. So here black is actually in some trouble. In fact, they're just straight up losing, because they moved their bishop out of the pawn chain so early, because now the bishop can't go back to unpin the knight. Black can't really hold on to the knight, and if they try desperately to hold on to it from move king to g7, you can just play the move knight to d5. And knight d5 hits the knight. Once again, the knight cannot move, or the queen is lost. And we have 1, 2, so right now we have 1, 2, 3 attackers on the knight, and it only has 1, 2 defenders. And if you look closely, this bishop and this knight they literally just cannot go backwards to defend the knight. These rooks and bishop can't defend the knight. So you're going to win material here. And if they try to move knight d4, attacking your queen, remember why we put this knight here? We could just take that. After takes, bishop takes, comes with check, and we win the queen. After the king moves, we just win the queen. Or if the queen takes, Once again, we can just take with queen, defended by the knight, and we're completely winning. So, we just looked at the move g6. It's a little bit risky for black, destabilizing this square, and we just saw what disaster could happen to him. But let's say they play the other move, natural move, queen to f6. The move queen to f6 guards g7 and counterattacks f2. But here, this is where the magic happens. We play the move knight e5, and this threatens the queen and this fork, but black will quickly realize he could just go queen takes f2. And this may look scary. It may look like we're getting checkmated after we move the king to d1. But don't worry, because right now, we're threatening this to trap the rook, this to fork the king and the rook, and we actually have another threat, which I'll show you in just a second. And don't worry about queen f1, because queen f1 is not checkmate, because the bishops go backwards, right? So here, let's say black is getting worried, right? How do you defend both this and this? They might play the move g6, and this might look super tempting, but we don't even want to go for that. Here, we play the move knight to h3, and this, we are essentially about to trap the queen. So right now, the queen's hanging. And if they play a move like pawn to d6, which counterattacks our queen, right, we can just take this. And then now if they take our queen, we can just take back. And we're up a piece. But let's say, because right now in this position, the queen really only has one square. It cannot go back because our knight covers that square. And let's not forget that this is still a threat. The queen's only square in this position is d4. And here we play the move d3. Gluing everything together. And if black just develops normally, or if it tries to, well, that's a free knight actually. If black tries to attack us, well, right now we're threatening to move c3, which would trap the queen. Like, it will just straight up trap the queen. The queen has no more squares. If black plays the move d6, counterattacking our queen, it doesn't matter. We just move our queen out of the way. And we're still threatening the pawn to c3. Don't forget, we still have this if we ever need it. And white is completely winning. We can always play moves like rook f1 and threaten checkmate. And this position should be very nice for you. Alright, so I think that pretty much covers it for the move 3 bishop c4. But I did promise you a different weapon, and this weapon I'm going to give you is pawn to f4 against knight c6. Now, this is also called the Vienna Gambit. But as you can see, it's a lot more dubious. Give the computer some time to think, it'll realize it's not so bad. But the move pawn to f4 is kind of like a delayed king's gambit. What we want is black to take, and then after they take, we have to play the move knight f3. And if we don't play the move knight f3, if we just play d4, which we want to play, then we allow queen h4 check. And this is a bit of an issue, because if we block with our pawn, they can just take. And we can't take back because of the pin. So don't blunder this. Make sure you play the move knight f3 to stop queen h4. Just like we do in the other Vienna Gambit. And if they just play like the move knight f6 here, we can play pawn to d4, and we're already completely winning. We have a big center, and it's the computer is gonna say, oh, this is too dangerous for black. But from practically speaking, once you have the full center and regain your pawn, this is how most players would play. We're just gonna be much better because we control more space in the center. We have 1, 2, 3 pieces developed, and we can put our bishop on c4, d3, or b5, and we're going to be very happy. So something like bishop e7, we could play bishop b5, or bishop c4. Oops. Short castles and castles, and again, we have this huge center. It's kind of like the variation with the pawn on d3, when the bishop on c4, but this is slightly different, because we have a pawn on d4 and e4, and black we can try to once again try to start some assault on the king's side, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 pieces aimed at him. So that's if they accept the gambit. If they don't accept the gambit, if they play the decline d6, well, then we get a very nice game. In this variation, we can put our bishop on b5 to pin this knight, and after something like knight f6, we can go pawn to d3, once again defending. And now it also kind of looks like the same position we had before, except this bishop was on c4. But you can also choose to commit the bishop to b5. And then once again, if they like unpin themselves, we can just play knight f3. They go bishop e7, just short castles, and we're very happy here because black, look at these bishops. These bishops can only go back and forth on these two squares because they're completely blocked in. So after like something like castles, we're much better here because we have more space in the center. Our bishops are more active. It's pinning the stuff. And once again, we go for an attack with queen e1, queen g3. And here's, you have to be very careful here because here some of you might think you have a tactic here with bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, and here you think, oh look, I can win a free pawn, right? Because I'm attacking it twice, removing the defender. The knight used to guard that square. But you have to be very careful here because if you take, and then do knight takes, you're actually losing because of queen to d4 check, which would hit the knight and the king, and you cannot defend both, and you're going to lose a piece here. So be very careful about taking this pawn on e5. You could take it once, but make sure instead you can play is like something like bishop e3 to stop the queen from coming in, and now you're threatening to take the pawn. But always watch out for moves like knight g4, which could be annoying. Alright, so I think that about covers it against what to do against the move knight c6. So from this video and our last two videos, you now have a full 100% free masterclass on the Vienna system. You know what to do against knight f6 and the Vienna gambit. And by the way, you could also play the bishop c4 variation here. Like, it's called the Stanley. You can go d3 and f4, same idea. And you also know what to do against the move knight c6, where I've recommended f4 or bishop c4. So you now know what to do against all of that. And we at the Chess Club can guarantee you'll win 95% of your games with this system. So that's it from me today, and I hope you enjoyed. We'll definitely be trying to upload more frequently, and if you have any recommendations or anything you would like to see us cover, either with the white pieces or the black pieces, either openings or middle games, please let us know. So thank you for watching, and have a good one.